Okay, so I've just started the recording. Welcome to this morning's e-memoir session. We're joined by Bob Craig of Bob Craig Learning and Development. And this is a webinar as part of his teaching and learning suite. It's the pedagogy of synoptic assessment. We like to keep the sessions as interactive as possible, so feel free to use the chat facility. Or if you'd like to use a microphone, just let me know and I'll unmute it for you. You'll be receiving a copy of the video recording and the slides to follow. And if you've got any questions, you can contact Bob directly as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bob for this session. Thanks a lot, Bob.
Thanks very much, Marek. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'll just do very quick introductions. You can see my details on the screen. I've been around FE for about 20 years. I started off as an English teacher, and then I've had other roles such as head of English, head of staff development, teacher training, learning and development. I've done a fair bit of tutoring and made the tea and all sorts of other things. So I'm very familiar. I've also had other roles in education, worked with schools and HE, but primarily most of my work's been in FE, further education. So after today, my details will be up on the screen, but do ring me or email me if there's any follow-up questions about the webinar today, or if you want to have a conversation about perhaps any in-house work or anything else, any other way I may be able to help. So there's a topic, so pedagogy of synoptic assessment. Really, this is becoming an increasingly big issue in education. By the way, I'm just going to close my window, apologise, there's some drilling outside, so just bear with me for 10 seconds. You don't think there's a mammoth coming to savage me or something? There's next door neighbours having the roof done. So anyway, pedagogy of synoptic assessment. So with a lot of vocational areas, with apprentices, with A-levels, GCSEs, there's been a shift from modularisation, from competency-based courses to a much more, in case of A-levels and GCSEs, linear exams, and in case of apprenticeships, there's much more emphasis on synoptic assessment. So I put together some ideas, and as Marek said, I would like you to come in with your own thoughts, your own experiences. By all means, ask questions as well. So really, this is what I'm planning to do. So we're going to just not spend too long on definitions of synoptic assessment, probably just about 30 seconds or so, but just so we're all clear what it is. Maybe examine one or two assumptions about what's meant by synoptic assessment. A big part of that, I think, particularly for vocational areas, for apprenticeships, is this merging together, this how effectively the theory sessions work with the practical sessions, whether that's in college or the relationship between being in a workplace and college. But when that's done well, that can really enhance the success of programs. When it's not done so well, when there's no communication between different parties, then obviously that leads to a lot of problems. So we're just going to touch on some suggestions on how to make that work. And then the third main thing is, if the topic today is about synoptic assessment, then really that brings in things like deep learning. You know, if a course is primarily modular, if it's competency based, then it's much easier to do something, sign it off and put it to one side. But that's and rightly, you know, I am overall, despite its challenges, an advocate of things like synoptic assessment, because it does encourage the integration of learning, the integration of knowledge. But to do that, it's much higher order skills that we're expecting of our students. The skills of deep learning, which we'll touch on, and study skills as well, things like note making, glossaries, being organised. These are all always been important skills for students, but particularly as we're talking about synoptic assessment, I would suggest they're even more important now. So I'm going to introduce you to one or two ideas and things to think about. So you're all busy, and I've been flying around the country for the last couple of weeks and for the next 4 weeks, and people not in education think this is a time of year when you put your feet up and it's a doddle and a lot of the students have gone. But I know, and you know, that it's a busy time of year, planning for next year and rounding off this year. So thanks for giving up an hour or so of your time. So I'm going to be, as it says there, just really exploring some strategies, some ideas to do synoptics, and what you're going to be doing, hopefully around with a pen or some sort of computer device. So you're going to be noting down some ideas, You're going to be deciding which bits to try out, which bits you don't think are going to work for you, asking questions and taking action. This, just like any CPD session, any information session, is only as good as what happens after the session. The quality of your notes as I'm talking, as other people maybe chipping in, it's about you saying, yeah, I like that idea, I can see how that would work with this particular cohort or this particular student. So really, you need to be curious as we go through the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And speaking of curiosity, anyone who's worked with me before or tuned into any webinars before, I'm absolutely clear in my own mind that curiosity is an overlooked aspect of teaching, learning, assessment, work-based practice. It applies to managers, senior managers, teachers, tutors, work-based assessors, to everybody really. We should be asking the question as educators, to what extent are we helping learners to be curious in the way we deliver learning, in the way we assess students, the way we question them. This, I think, should be at the heart of everything that we do. We talk a lot about things like independent learners and motivation, and really, and resilience, and when you drill down to the next level, I think curiosity is a massive part. And there's a lot of science around that if students are curious, then their brain becomes like a vortex. It opens up, it becomes more, absorbs information, it stores information. We get all sorts of other benefits from being curious. So that's the subject of another webinar, a full webinar, but I just want to leave you with that idea that is the way you interact with students likely to get them asking questions of themselves, likely to inspire them to want to find out more? Is it going to help them to work out of class because they're genuinely interested in what they're doing and they can see the relevance of it? So I could sort of go on about this all day, but I'm going to discipline myself and we're going to move off the curiosity screen, move away from the curiosity screen. Oh, one more. So I sort of touched on this really, but if this is applicable to all learning, but particularly if we're talking about synoptic assessment, requires students to remember things more fully, requires students to integrate ideas and skills and knowledge, and it's even more applicable. This, I'll just leave it on the screen just for a few seconds as a break from my voice. So dopamine, so if learners are curious, they want to discover more, they have a more exploratory approach to learning rather than just, something that's done to them, bring it on sort of approach to learning that they may have experienced in school, they may have experienced in other contexts. We want them to be curious and want them to discover things, and we want them to, by doing that, this isn't just my opinions, lots of brain scans and studies have demonstrated that there's a real physiological benefit. Dopamine is released when students are curious, and that has benefits in itself. It's more likely to make them resilient and want to keep going and repeat things and to master things and to develop self-confidence and belief. So, quick couple of slides, just examine our assumptions. So it's quite nice deconstructing words sometimes. I'm sort of got an English background, so I would say that, but hopefully we're all curious enough. Syn in the synoptic means together, and optic means viewing. So, put the two together. Synoptic assessment is very much about togetherness, viewing things together. We need students to combine their knowledge and understanding from different parts of the course, different modules, different topic areas. So obviously the third point there, it stands to reason that it fails. Synoptic assessment, you'll have real challenges, students will struggle when it's not built into course design, when it isn't one of the priorities of designing a course. And the second bit, again, this is obvious, but if we actually examine ourselves and are honest with ourselves, and I've worked with lots of colleges where the module teams don't always communicate well, where one teacher, one assessor, one leader has one particular area of responsibility and someone else has a different area, and if they don't talk regularly, then you're not going to have that synoptic relationship, that working together relationship. So if that's not something you're doing well, then that's something you really need to look carefully at, how well the different educators are working together. So it does encourage links, so that's really sort of self-explanatory. We've touched on that. But this second one, just think about it just for a few moments now, and after this webinar, really think about this idea of higher order learning skills. If we want students to bring together different parts of a course, we can't teach in a sort of modular way like maybe sometimes we used to. We can't sort of do things, put it to one side, sign it off, move on. It's got to be integrated, and that needs students to be able to apply, to synthesize, and these are higher order skills. You know, whatever the level of course a student is doing, there's still higher order skills. Even within the level 1 course, there's a sense that students still need to be able to apply and compare things and bring things together. So you need to think about, are the deliverers, are the educators equipped, and do they understand these core principles of, and we're going to come on to those a little bit later. So this is something that this togetherness, this synoptic idea between theory and practice, not two separate parts of a course, but actually the two things work together well. So it's important that the practical sessions aren't just about the doing. They're not just about applying things, getting your hands dirty, the real world, you know, the sorts of things people say, rightly so to an extent. But the practical sessions aren't just about doing, and the theory sessions aren't just about having things done to them. That's a perception that a lot of students have, and some educators might have as well. So I think you can see this through the second bullet point, that to integrate theory and practice, the learning should be situated as a conversation, a negotiation, an exploration between the theory and the practical elements of a course. And if anyone's tuning in and their particular areas are academic studies and A-levels where maybe there isn't too much practice, then the principles are the same. The different modules need to be clear that how they knit together with each other. So in the planning and the delivery, this phrase is used a lot. It's used a lot in equality and diversity, but it is important to actually help the people that we work with, help ourselves to understand what this actually means and actually create opportunities to be alert to how we actually do that. So things like learning checks and plenaries don't just happen at the end of a session, the end of a workshop experience. We don't spend 10 minutes at the end saying, okay guys, okay, what have we learned, what are we not sure about? And the best practice in a workshop environment, in a theory environment, is to have lots of little pauses, learning checks, and to be saying to students in theory classes, so how does what we've learned there from your experiences in the workplace, in the workshops, how does what we've learned apply to that? How are you going to use this information? Where are the inconsistencies? Just continuously making that link. And the same in the practical sessions. So I put my last bullet point there. For example, so in a theory class, I put what T2P means, theory to practice. You're in a theory class, so instead of in the theory class saying to students, read this, find out about this, you know, giving them academic type things to do, ask them to try things out. Their homework or their task prior to the next theory class is to try something out and report back and critique that. And exactly the same but reversed. So in the practical sessions, the last thing we say to students might not necessarily be to do with practical application. It might be, you know, go and find out about what we've been doing today. Go and find two references, two pieces of information that are going to support what we've done today in the practical sessions. So I think that's quite an easy and probably happens a lot of the time anyway, but I think that's a really easy and a valuable, possibly high impact way to begin to knit together the theory to practice. And Marek, by the way, I'm concentrating on my own screen and talking. If anyone is asking a question at any stage, if you could report that to me, because I'm not reading so much the bit on the left. I'm just
certainly will, no problem. Well, Steve's already pointed out that this is, it's a little bit like the flipped model.
yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's exactly what it's like. We want students to be doing interesting things out of class, and then when you're in this learning situation, you're applying what you've learned and you're knitting things together. So
Super.
we can maybe have a webinar on flip. I'm doing a session at I can't remember, Hereford or Chichester, somewhere soon anyway, just on flipped learning and how to make it work.
Brilliant.
Theory, so come in if you disagree with this, but from my experience from working not just in 5 colleges as a member of staff, but working with 50 as a consultant, as doing what I'm doing here, is that theory can be viewed not just by the students, but by the teachers too and the managers as something that's a bit abstract, it's a bit detached. At worst, it's something that's, bears little resemblance to the reality. People talk about the reality of workplace practice and this sort of ivory tower and this abstract theory. And if we give, whatever our personal views, if students pick up on that message, then they're going to turn up late. Their attendance is going to be poor in theory classes. They're not going to value it. They're not going to get involved in learning theoretical and models and processes outside of class. They're only going to really think that the workplace and the practical is the thing that matters. So this is I would suggest if any managers listening or any non-managers want to facilitate this session, just get your guys together and say, how are we projecting the theory input to our courses? Because just leading on from that, there is this mindset issues, this idea about labelling and the beliefs that we hold that students come with. The session I'm doing on Friday is about maths and English. Students come with milestones around their neck about I'm crap at maths and I'm not very academic and I've never been able to write and spelling and grammar is boring, and just these sort of things that they sometimes say out loud and often say in their minds. These have a massive impact in their willingness to grapple with things that are difficult, their willingness to stretch and challenge themselves. So we've got to be really alert to these things that students are saying. I'm a hands-on person. Theory is just something that the enemy, the awarding body, it's not me. I hear that a lot from colleagues sometimes saying, yeah, well, we've got to do this. It's on the syllabus. The awarding body have decided this is important. Just, especially in the first half, once we get to know students better and we have that trust between us, I think it's okay sometimes to make our personal views, not too much, but to make them known. But particularly for the first couple of months of the course, we've got to get the right messages to students that the theory and the practice elements of a course complement each other. And this theory sometimes can be a bit of there's a phrase that Jeff Petty uses. Most of you will have heard of him. He's written a lot of books about good teaching methods and evidence-based teaching methods. He talks about the content trap. Sometimes in the theory classes we say, oh, I've got all this stuff to get through, so we rattle through hundreds and hundreds of PowerPoint slides, and the teacher talks too much because I've got all this stuff to get through, and that becomes not conducive to synoptic assessment and synoptic approaches to teaching and learning. So we've got to be clear that not just the messages we give to students, but the way we deliver theory. So we're not just getting through it, we're actually helping students to learn and making decisions about which bits to spend more time on and which bits we can skip through a bit quicker. Again, more about that a little bit later. So just a couple more slides on this. I hope you don't, I did want to spend a fair bit of time on this area because I do think it's important for the whole synoptic approaches to teaching, learning and assessment. So this is the value of theory. These are some of my slides, but do type in now and Marek can relay them to me if you've got your own ways of doing this. But for me, theory provides a framework. It's not detached from practice. It gives you methodology. It helps people to when it's done well, it's about procedures, frameworks. It gives students a language in which to talk about their subject area in which to critique and analyse their subject area. It creates a specialist language. Jargon. Jargon can be bad. Sometimes it can exclude outsiders, it can be complicated, but within a curriculum area it can create a sense of identity. You know, all hair and beauty, construction, agriculture, horticulture, every motor vehicle, every area's got their own jargon, their own specialist language. So theory can create that common understanding, it can give people frameworks, and it should, when it's integrated with practice, it should actually help to problem solve. So when students are engaging in some sort of practical activity, then the educator there should be sort of saying, can you remember maybe something you did a few weeks ago, and making that direct link to the theory to help students to understand. So just finally on this, so once, well, you can read the screen as a little break from my voice. So some theories we want students, we don't want them to have their own opinion about. There's some things that are especially related to health and safety, but not just that. There's certain procedures and practices that we don't want them to have their own view about and put their own spin on, their own slant on. Some things are factual, some things are givens, and we need them to know that. But a lot of theory is there to be critiqued, is there to be a guide rather than a straitjacket. So this is an introductory slide, and I'm going to go through each of these 5 areas to do with teaching strategies in a bit more detail. So just quickly skip through though. So how can we as educators help to develop deep learning in students, and what approaches can we take? So there's not just making sure all teaching staff and managers are aware, but also students are aware of things like Bloom. I've got a slide where I'm going to show you Bloom. If you get any flashbacks to your teacher training courses, and sorry about that, but Bloom is an excellent theory I would suggest to you. So we're going to look at that very briefly, and look at what's actually, unpick this phrase deep learning a little bit more. And something we need to be reminded of, something I'm passionate about, really genuinely am, is helping students to be aware of the process of learning. So if we want them to develop higher order thinking, learning skills that are going to help them with synoptic assessment, shouldn't be some secret that we have. It should be something that explicitly we explore with students. How do you learn? What helps you to learn? What do you struggle with? So having these, when we do our little learning checks, it's not just what do we know and what we're not sure about, it's how. How did you learn? How didn't you learn? What's your mindset when you make a mistake? How could we shift that a little bit so mistakes are something to be learned from, and are something seen as inevitable and helpful, not scary and embarrassing. So we'll look a little bit about process of learning, touch briefly on glossaries, note making, and something called graphic organisers.
I think it touches on with Steve had just mentioned as well there, Bob, that better links needed to be made with theory and practical skills, to understand why something is done, and why it can make the actual doing easier as well. And Andrew had also mentioned something I think we're obviously going to be touching on, and the importance of all of this. Oops, when I find it, as I have just somehow managed to minimise my screen. Are you still there, Bob?
I am, yeah.
Okay, I
think I don't know how people to have a break from my voice anyway. So.
I've just somehow managed to magic everything away. If you bear with me for 1 second. Can everyone still see Bob's screen? Excellent.
So let's skip on, Marek. You have a look for that.
Yeah, please do, while I try and find everything once again there. Sorry, apologies for this, everyone. Oh no, I'm back now, yes. Yeah, and Andrew was just saying as well about employers having a huge part to play in promoting the theory element of a course, which is obviously something which is going to be so relevant to all of this at the moment, certainly through apprenticeships and the like there, which is obviously something that we're going to be covering. And Steve has also said, this is where we can aid when creating the assessment plans with the employers.
Definitely, and where there'll be some excellent employers who are all over, who do see this close integration and see the benefit, but the reality is there'll be some who, because there can be a bit of a cynicism about sort of academic stuff and college life, and the real world is in the work, when you actually start work, and there may be some truth in that you do learn most when you're actually doing the job, most people. But so if employers aren't clear about not just the value of theory but the specifics of what their apprentices are doing on the theory side of the course, then it is going to create a big barrier to this synoptic assessment and the students' learning and the students' perceptions as well. Definitely. So this is a very quick reminder of Bloom, because I think it is an excellent thing to share with students and to share with, so in an old modular competency-based courses, we could probably, the best of us didn't do this, but you could probably get away with the bottom two strands, just helping students to cram, to have a certain amount of knowledge, to have a certain level of understanding, so they can summarise and they can fill the box and they can get their exam and their competency signed off. What we're talking about now with synoptic assessment is apply upwards. People need to apply the learning from one area to another area. And analysis isn't just a skill of level 3 and 4 and higher learners. At any level, an analysis, it's a great skill that we want to develop in our students. Just the basic ability to say things like, is this a fact or is it an opinion? What are the reasons for this? Even if the reason is very stripped down and quite superficial, we can still develop analytical skills, help students to have an element of evaluative skills at whatever their level. And maybe that's obvious to people listening, but sometimes we associate applying above with level 3 and level 4 type learners and the bottom 2 with lower learners. It's not how Bloom should be used. It applies to every learner, and it's a really, if I was teaching again in colleges or managing again in colleges, I would have a little Bloom poster that I would be regularly making students aware of, because this is just how, in most cases, our thinking and our learning is structured. You have a basic level of understanding, you learn how to apply that, you can deconstruct it and apply, you can analyse things, and then you can evaluate things. So talk about Bloom in some organisations, and they groan because they've been bloomed to death. So if you're all over it, then fine, but if you haven't thought about this, it's a brilliant way to help students to develop higher order thinking skills. It can help teachers to set objectives for learners, and it's got also, it's a great thing to have in mind when we're questioning students. The shy ones, the ones who have missed a few classes, we might just get them to list 2 things, and the other students, we might want to develop that and get them to apply or analyse something. So we'll leave Bloom for now, but do come back to him and ask me if you've got any further questions about this. Touched on this earlier, but how do we help students to prepare for synoptic assessment? We help them to understand themselves, not just what they're learning, but their own processes, their own, what they do in different situations. So we're asking them some of these questions. I'll just leave that up a minute while you read that screen, then I'll maybe pinpoint 1 or 2 of the areas. So there's lots of little ways you can package this up. There's one, I've got loads of ideas. One just springs to one called 3-2-1. So you could ask students 3 things you've learned, 2 things you're not sure about, and 1 thing that helped you to learn. So you wouldn't ask all these questions obviously in one go, but just have in mind the thing you do at the end of a session, the little learning checks you do throughout a session, to ask students, what did you struggle with, what did you find difficult, what was your approach to that, did you give up, did you ask one of your peers, Did you try and find out information for yourself? Did you try one of the other approaches? Just constantly getting over to students that we're not a production line. Learning, it feels like that sometimes, I know, and I know the challenges we face as educators with, heavily burdened curriculum, lots of content, and we've got to embed maths in English and we've got to embed END. So I know it's difficult, but if as soon as students have this idea that it's a bit of a production line, then we're not going to achieve the full potential. So we've got to get them thinking about the relevance of what they're learning and how they learn, and so that they can self-regulate. So that after a while they ask themselves these questions. What did I do when I hit a mistake? Did I try something small? Did I just give up easily and tell myself how crap I am? Glossaries, another area that we could spend a long time on. Just about every area, every subject area has some sort of glossary. So I'm not introducing some radically new concept to anybody, but do it well. Do you just give the students a paper glossary, or is it something on Moodle or something online, and you say, right, here's a glossary, here's the terms you need to know? Because there's much more creative ways, and usually it's best if students have some input to the creation of that glossary. So these are some questions you could have. So for example, do you have a primary glossary where there's terms that are not disputable, you don't want them to put their own words on it, spin on it, you need to know some core terms. So that's maybe what you call a primary glossary, and then you could have another glossary that you build as a group, or the students build that. Could be hosted online. There's lots of different, you can just have it as a table in a Word document, or you could have something more, this thing I like called Linoit, Linoit. It's just an online virtual notice board where you can pin things on. So the glossary might include video images of key terms, of key concepts. It might include, you could pin a Word document onto this virtual notice board, this thing that I mentioned, Linoit. I'll say it again, Linoit. So if you just Google that and have a play around. I think there's other things, Padlet. And so glossaries don't have to be just fixed, paper-based, dry documents that are precious and can't be added to. And I would suggest to you to think about, do you want students to include images as part of the glossary? Do you, as it says on the screen, are you just having definitions of key words, or can a glossary include websites, good websites, key theories, key organizations? So this glossary, instead of just being a fixed document, becomes a live document. It becomes a creative process, becomes a go-to place, not just for words, but for people and theories. And so these are all questions that you could that you need to ask yourself. And again, if you're interested, probably only about an hour session, but could do a full webinar on this, or I could talk to you individually, or we could come and work in your organisation about things like glossaries and note making and some of the other things. But so as we touched at the beginning, study skills. I keep saying the same phrase, but to really embed the idea. So if we're thinking about synoptic assessment, and we need students to have deep learning skills, and we need them to integrate knowledge, they need to have good glossaries, they need to make good notes. Everyone makes notes. Some notes are more helpful than others. Some notes, some students, if they haven't been taught how to, and reminded, not just something you do in induction, the first week you give them a handout, or you give them a little bit of instruction about making notes and having subheadings and using colour and all these sort of techniques you might introduce them to, and then forget about it. It should be something, it should be a conversation certainly in most months, or if not most weeks, talking to them, looking at their notes, giving them feedback, getting students to look at each other's approaches. So this is a question for you and your colleagues should be able to have good answers to when students ask these questions. Just have a quick read of the questions. So some of this fairly obvious, but not no harm to remind ourselves. And then the main technique I'm going to come to is on the next slide. But encouraging students to use symbols like increase, increasing, etc. And to annotate their notes. Sometimes we'll give handouts, worksheets, and various documents to students, and then they put them away in a little Polly Pocket and file it away, and it looks very nicely presented in a file. I want notes to be dirty. I want them to be scribbled on, annotated, and we need to help students to do that. And we need to give them license to do that. You know, they might not be aware that they're allowed to critique things, and they're allowed to write on things and drop arrows showing connections between bits and make notes to themselves to find out more or to ask the teacher and so on. And space, you know, have a look at the materials that we give our students and just ask yourself, is there space for students to make notes? Whether that's a page at the end of a document, a box, double line spacing, 2 lines between paragraphs instead of 1 line. However, there's loads of ways you can do it, but they need space and they need dirt. Students need dirt, directed improvement and reflection time. A little bit of time in class to reflect on what they've learned, to reflect on the process of what they've learned, to make some notes. Because if we don't, even though time is precious, this is time well spent. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes, it can be 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on what's appropriate, but we need to give them little bits of time. Linked to that, by the way, I haven't put that on a slide, but something just come to mind. Silence. Occasionally, you might be screaming at the screen now saying, I can't give my students silence, but I would suggest to you that it's another one of these underused things in education. Giving students 30 seconds, 1 minute, no talking, no sharing ideas, no questions. Here's the question, or here's the thing I wanted to look at. Because I don't know about you, there'll be about half of your students and probably about half of you guys tuning in who are slightly more on the introvert spectrum than extrovert. And introverts need to look at something, they need to work it in their own mind, they need to be clear what they're being asked to do, they need to sort of have a little bit of space to think. Other people, it's not that one's right and wrong, but other people learn by bouncing half an idea off someone else, gauging the response and thinking as they're speaking. So if we want students to be deep learners, we need to give them space to make notes, we need to give them reflection time, and we need to give sometimes include a bit of silence. The bottom one, technology. You know, a question for you again to ask yourself, to ask your colleagues, to what extent do you use phones in teaching, learning and assessment environments? Sometimes you might not want students to have access to them for obvious reasons. They'll be diverted and everything else. But they do have a place to play, and a lot of teachers use them brilliantly, a lot of educators use them brilliantly. You can use them for photos, sound recording sometimes. And there's other things like voice recognition software. I've got Dragon on my computer, and sometimes I just talk and then it types for me. It makes notes and then you can come back to the notes and change them. But QR codes. These, you have the little black and white, usually square grids that you can get. They're a really good way to assist with note making and with any sort of learning really. And I've seen some brilliant practice in this area, and one guy springs to mind. I had a construction at Hull College, a guy called Mike Abel, who, if you're in construction by the way, he's won lots of awards for creative teaching and learning. A really good guy, really creative, and he sort of got me onto this idea of QR codes. So for example, on a notice board, it can be a themed notice board, health and safety, or a particular construction process. He has a little QR code there. Students scan it with their phones or another device, and then that immediately takes them to further information, or immediately takes them to a notes page where they can, you know, they can write notes. So this isn't I won't say this is my specialist area. I'm having to work hard myself to upgrade my own sort of use of technology, but you know, so feel free to chip in if anyone's got anyone listening in now has got a great example of how technology can be used to make notes, to develop study skills, or to help with synoptic assessment.
Yeah, Steve just mentioned one actually here. I'm going to copy and paste it in for everybody else to see as well. Is it Auresma? Auresma? Auresma. That sounds
A-U-R
A Auresma. Sounds like it's a cool method. Brings augmented reality to anything. I've used this, for example, questions and build walkthrough videos to the question sheet. Oh, that sounds good. That we'll have a look at that one.
Yeah, me too. If you can not have a look now, guys, we'll finish in 10 minutes. But I'm definitely, I know I'm doing it at 11 o'clock. First thing is get a cup of tea. Second thing is go and check out Auresma. So thanks for that, Steve.
Brilliant. Thanks. There we go.
Again, maybe I probably wouldn't be the right person to do this, but maybe Steve or the guy I mentioned, Mike Abel, or someone else can do a webinar on sort of technology for learning, because there's so much out there. And I remember working in colleges of being sometimes bombarded with too much e-learning, too much technology, and you end up just sticking your head in the sand. But I think there is a place for just 3-4 top tips, 3-4 practical ways that we can integrate technology, because learners are they're the techno generation, aren't they? So anyway, we'll move off that for now. Maybe that's for another day, a specific webinar on that. This is, again, forget if you've tuned into one of my webinars before, hopefully you don't think I'm a one-trick pony, because there are 2 or 3 messages that whatever I do, I often come back to, because I think they're absolutely core and central, and they have so many valuable uses. So one of them was curiosity that we mentioned earlier. Whatever subject, I'm doing assessment for learning, leadership, whatever, that's a big thing. Another thing is graphic organizers. So what are graphic organizers? So there's a few examples on your screen there. So things like flowcharts, mind maps. The double bubble one, what's distinctive about topic A? Let's call that gas. Topic B, electricity, and the bits in the middle are the things that are similar about these 2 areas. So I've got, there's literally hundreds of these. I've used about 20 of them myself, and educators who've done research into what helps students to learn generally, not just in terms of synoptic assessment. And this always comes as one of the highest, what's called effect sizes. So when research is done, one of the things that makes the biggest difference is getting students, instead of always writing paragraphs, filling out boxes, bullet pointing. I love bullet points, but there's too much bullet pointing. You give a student a piece of flip chart paper, and most of the time they'll bullet point, or a teacher, bullet point, bullet point. If we're developing higher order skills in students to prepare them for synoptic assessment, then one of the best ways is to use graphic organizing in the way we present materials, but also in the way that students make notes, in the way that they revise, in the way that they plan. So like the flowchart, for example, you've got 3 stages, 1, 2, 3 there. Off each stage you could have a couple of bubbles. So for stage 1 you could have a few things around, a few reminders or notes, and the same for the other stages. Once we get students using graphic organizers to plan, to sequence things, to consolidate a module or a sequence of learning, then we can get them to look at each other's. Much easier to learn from someone's graphic organizer than it is from a lot of notes that you can't often read the writing for. It's much easier for us to look at the students' thought processes. Why have they put things in the order 1, 2, 3, 4 when someone else has done 1, 2, 5, 6? It's a student who can give students feedback for learning. We can help them to plan and sequence, etc. There's loads of really excellent learning benefits from using these sorts of approaches. There's yeah, probably got for hours about affinity diagrams, fish bones. There's all sorts of examples. So maybe that's something you could get in touch about if you see the value of this for all aspects of teaching, learning, and assessment. Because if I haven't made it clear that what the values of these isn't just that we can see what students are thinking, we can give them quick feedback, we can get them looking at each other's. It's easier for them to revise from this sort of format than it is from pages and pages of notes. It is also developing a higher order thinking skills. It encourages them to sequence things, to look for the order, to justify why they've put their timeline in that order. It's no losers really, basically. So I'll have a look at, hopefully after this webinar, there'll be two or three things you look at further, and hopefully this is one of them, the value of graphic organisers. So I'm going to leave a little bit of time for questions. I'll just sort of round off by saying thank you for listening, and thank you for those particularly who've chipped in. We've got the Oresna, and there's probably other thing. When I stop talking in a second, you might have some questions or comments that we can share as a whole. Marek might want to say a few concluding remarks, but there's my details. You can contact me through Marek's. We've got a really good relationship with Marek. I really respect him, and I think his company, him and his dad Bees, are building a really excellent company. So you can contact Marek and get to me that way, or you can contact me directly at the details there if there's any further information. So thanks everyone. I'll just pass over to Marek in case there's any questions or final comments.
Super. Thank you very much for that, Bob. Thanks for the questions and thoughts from the participants. Yes, so as Bob says, any final thoughts, any closing thoughts from anyone who's joined in there? Indeed, again, if anyone would like me to unmute the microphone, if you'd like to put anything directly to Bob, I can do that for you. We're more than happy to help. We'll just see if we've got some more coming in through there. Just a little note from Denise there, just mentioning that you know, I can say this as I no longer teach, but my focus as a sessional tutor had to be on my units alone. Not good. All right. No, I see where you're coming from there, Denise. Any other thoughts from anyone there at all, though? Any other suggestions for any? Are there any other materials or anything like that, including those that Steve has mentioned? Anyone using any good examples? I know some of you, perhaps, as Denise is saying there, you know, are no longer actually teaching themselves anymore. But if there any of you are out there, if there's anything else that you've got there that might be a good example for us to look at. And I know some of the feedback has come through that you would be interested as well. This is something for you, Bob, as well. You know, you mentioned that we could actually focus some of the future sessions on looking actually at some of the specifics of some of these programs out there, the best practice in how to better use them as well in the live environment. That's something, it sounds like there's a bit of an appetite for that as well.
Yes, I'd go along with that, and again, it would be great if, because I work in colleges and I support people, but you're actually there, or not just colleges, but training organisations and so on, and you're the ones doing it more, you know, more than me in some respects. So what I give is the sort of dipping into other places and have an overview perspective of lots of stuff that's going on, but you've got the sort of case study example. So either chipping in when I'm doing mine a little bit more than we did then, or maybe doing something joint. You know, maybe I do a bit of my sort of overview from across the sector, then two of you maybe have 5 minutes each and say, right, this is what we're doing in our organisation, and this is what's worked, and this is what hasn't worked so well.
Absolutely, we'd be really keen on that, and certainly for any participants here, you know, if it's, say, for example, it isn't yourself who's participating at the moment, but if you know that your colleagues or your college or, like say, your provider is doing something that you're particularly proud of, and you'd like to share it with not just us here now, but to the wider audience as well, and you'd like to participate with Bob and ourselves and perhaps a few other providers in this format, then please let us know. We'd be more than happy to help there. Another note from Denise, they're saying, changing mindsets is vital, and that'd be another useful session. Because I know it's something that we've certainly looked at before, haven't we, Bob? And we'll certainly look at again.
Well, that's most of my work at the moment is on the area of mindset. Most of the thing I'm doing, because whether it's sort of mindset of English and maths students or of apprentices or teachers, managers' mindsets, it's a massive area, and it's something. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist as well as doing this, and a lot of the, even though we're not therapists, a lot of the learning about how to help people to have rational beliefs, preferences, rather than have absolute demands that they make of themselves and others. If you think you mustn't ever get things wrong, or people should behave in a certain way, and you make demands, and when these demands aren't met, it leads to conflict, and it leads to anger, and it can lead to anxiety and all sorts of other things. So there's loads to learn from Carol Dweck if anyone's interested in mindset. She's a leading figure in this area and has written and interesting stuff about it. Some great stuff from sport. A guy called Matthew Said is very powerful in the area of not just mindset, but something I'm passionate about, marginal gains. The benefits when we're working with students, a thing called the aggregation of marginal gains, which is the basic idea that lots of little changes aggregate into a big change. They help to build confidence in individuals, and they help organisations to be innovative and collaborative. So this idea of, if you want to help people to change a mindset, sometimes where the student is now or the apprentice is now and where they want to be just seems too big a gap for them. So their mindset is, I'm not going to try too hard because I'm probably going to fail anyway, so I might as well just be the funny one or the cool one, or just sort of, don't put myself in the firing line, don't stretch myself, don't do too many things new, just stick to what I know. And what we want to do is to completely shift that mindset around and to help students to see stepping out of your comfort zone is something that can be a bit scary, and that's a natural response, but it's ultimately going to lead to progress. And there's millions and millions of really good materials that are out there and that I've got about things like famous failures, people we look at Messi and Steve Jobs and, Oprah Winfrey, and there's Michael Jordan and Branson and millions of people who we look at and think, these people are really gifted, really talented, really I'll never be like them, but they've all had barriers to overcome, they've all struggled, they've all had failures, they've all pushed through the ceilings that maybe they set themselves, or maybe they've picked up from school or parents or society, that no point in trying too hard. And so there's loads of fascinating stuff around this area. I think I'm definitely doing something next year on mindset, a webinar. This is the main area of work that I'm doing.
Yeah, that'd be super, because I know when we've discussed previously, and obviously when we're talking mindset, I'm going to say, for example, applying it to just apprenticeships alone, and it's something that we're looking at with apprentices, staff internally within the colleges, the employees. It's right across the board there, isn't it, Bob? So
and managing, managers that create a fixed mindset culture, in other words, a culture based on fear and fault, too much emphasis on fault and not enough on sort of solutions and moving forward and encouraging risk-taking. Yeah. It's just as, you can tell almost the culture of an organisation is in big part down to the mindset of the senior leaders and down a notch to the sort of middle managers. So their mindsets are more important in many ways than the mindsets of educators, assessors and students. They create the climate and the culture.
Brilliant. I think, like I say, that's something that we can look at. We could take that apart and look at that specifically as well with participants and perhaps different areas within your organisations as well. So we could look at some of the specifics of that, because I've got a feeling that would be be very useful. And as I can see that Denise is noting here, you know, trouble is college leaders are having to be safe, and I can see.
Some are, but not all. But that's I take what Denise is saying, and there is an element of that. But as I say, I do work probably with about 30 organisations just this year, and the ones that are encouraging people to be, we're not talking about revolution, but just to take some of these risks and to innovate and have an experimental approach to your job, whether you're working on reception or you're the principal, trying things out. These are the colleges and sorry, I keep saying colleges, apologies for training organisations. These are organisations that do thrive and do the places you want to work as well. They do attract the best staff because people want to work in these places.
Super. That's true, and certainly from our experience as well. Actually, I just note there as well, Denise, is that something around that date in July? Is that something to share with everyone, or is that a specific for Bob there as well? If you can just let me know, that'd be cool. But yeah, no, super. Any other thoughts from anybody else out there? Excellent. Oh, so the date on the 14th, is that open for other participants? Sorry, Denise. I just said there might be another opportunity for some others as well. Excellent. If you can send me the details, Denise, and then I'll let all the rest of the participants know, and I'll drop that in the email with everybody else, and that's regarding a Maths and English networking day that's coming up in July, and I'm assuming that's with ATL Group then as well. Super. I'll obviously let Bob know, and I'll let everybody else, all the participants know there, and that sounds like something you can share with your team as well. Brilliant. Oh, that's super. Excellent. Any final thoughts then? Thanks for that, Dawn. Thanks for the feedback everyone's giving us, and obviously Bob, fantastic once again. I always walk away from Bob's webinars, and my mind always starts to kick in. It's round about now, and as soon as I click stop on the recording and shut the session down, it kicks in. And I'll be perhaps driving the car down to the shops or on my bike, and the thoughts start coming through. So maybe I'll have to look at a different way of recording some of those thoughts as well, Bob.
Yeah, stand on your head. Just do it a bit differently.